Today was a day more than any other that mankind looked at itself and declared, "The future is here." A machine had been invented that could instantly transport objects and even people from one place to another. Shipping centers and airports were replaced by teleportation centers across the globe. Travel became instant and cheap. But some argued that the machines did more than transport people. They also killed them, since the machines didn't use exactly the same atoms in exactly the same precision. What arrived on the other side wasn't the original, but only a copy. However, because the copy had the memory of the original's past, it believed it was the same person. The original, however, was destroyed. They said it only appeared as though you were transported because the effect was instant. What if the machine were altered so the copy appeared 1,000 years later? Would it still be thought to be the same person despite all the time and non-existence? Worse still, what if the copy appeared slightly before the original vanished and was able to watch the final moments of the original's life before they vanished forever? It would become clear that they were only a clone, created at that moment. Our protagonist was among the most passionate of them. He watched in horror as clones came out of the machine, believing they were men who had lived long lives when they had only just been created a moment before. He picketed and protested and tried to convince the world that they were marching to their deaths. However, his arguments were too complex and abstract, and the convenience of instant travel too great.
But there haven't been any reports of illness or memory loss from using them. It's not about memory loss, Bob.
The public simply didn't care. He felt hopeless as millions marched to their death just to save a bit of time. The greatest genocide of all time was taking place, and instead of battling against it, the world cheered it on as progress. Few would even listen to his arguments, and even for those who would, the conveniences of the machine far outweighed such an abstract fear. Then, by chance, an extraordinary thing happened. There he was, the devil himself.
Excuse me, aren't you the inventor of the teleportation machine? I am. Can I ask you something? Does your machine reassemble the person with the exact same molecules in the same position? Individual atoms move around, if that's what you're asking. Aha! So you admit it is merely copying them, not moving them. Your machine is killing millions and creating nothing but clones in their place. My boy, surely you don't think that you are the individual atoms of your body, do you? One carbon atom is the same as the next, and your body itself flushes out and replaces atoms all the time, yet you say nothing of copies. You are not the atoms in your body, but the pattern of the atoms. Your consciousness is an emergent feature of that pattern, not of any particular individual atoms, and it is the pattern which is transported and maintained. Though, of course, there is a short interruption of the consciousness, but no more than being knocked unconscious or even a good night's sleep. If your persistent self survives that, then it certainly survives my machine. Good day.
This, however, did not comfort the man. The old man was right. There was no difference between one atom and the next. A man's life is the consciousness produced by the pattern of atoms. It doesn't matter if the atoms are changed, only if the consciousness is interrupted. But what then if it is? He did not sleep that night, wondering if only death awaited him. By morning, he had lost all doubt. He knew he could only hold out a day or two more before his body betrayed him. He would drift into unconsciousness, and this thing he called myself would vanish forever, only a memory of it remaining for the next life. He did not go to work that day. No man would spend his only day on earth at the office. Instead, he wandered the city aimlessly. Anxiety consumed him as he tried to think of what he should do with his short time left. No single activity seemed worthy to take up the whole of his remaining time. He woke suddenly on a bus. He had drifted off to sleep, to death. Remembering the last couple of days, he decided the most sensible thing to do was to grab what small pleasure he could from his all too short a life. Though it did little to ease his anxiety, he took what he could from this moment of life. However, his money quickly ran out. 3 days passed, each life more wretched than the last. Desperate for a reprieve, he wanted nothing more than to forget it all and go back to the way it was before. However, he knew of no method to destroy an idea. After many years and many more lives, he decided at last that there was only one course of action. He walked along the bridge, cursing each of his lives for their greed and selfishness, leaving each of themselves worse off than the last. He climbed the fence, and for the first time he felt ready for death. He stood on the precipice, thinking of all his many past lives and of all his lives that had yet to come. He thought it was his duty to save them from their short, miserable, anxiety-ridden existences. But then he wondered what right he had to take their lives, as horrible as they might be. He was connected to them by only his imagination, and them to him by only their memory. To kill himself would be to, at the same moment, murder all of them. No different than murdering a stranger on the street. Even if he thought the stranger led a life of misery, it was not his right to take it. The man was not a murderer. Instead of killing them without a choice, he could perhaps give them a chance at peace. He would leave this place and start anew in a far green country. He returned to a familiar place, but for the first time as a patron. He bought his ticket, the ticket he would use to end his life. It cost him $92. He thought of all his past lives, so many of them miserable and tormented, and for what? All for this idea which had overtaken his mind, the idea that life is short. Of course, all lives were short, but his were a mere moment. Was brevity alone enough to cause meaninglessness? He wondered if perhaps there was another way. What if they were wrong to try to destroy the idea? Was there a way to live with it in peace? Perhaps through his sacrifice, his future selves could find a way to accept death the way he had. By accepting it, they could live their brief lives without anguish, perhaps even with joy and meaning. It was too late for him, of course. Death was upon him. He hoped that his next life would look back at him fondly. He hoped they would remember how he had not sacrificed the future for his own desires. The machine began to hum. It was time. There was a bright flash of light, and then nothingness. He emerged from the other end of the machine a new man. His past lives faded away. They seemed like nothing more than a distant memory. He realized what fools they had been, chasing petty pleasures. He hitched a ride to the countryside. He now saw clearly what he had known for some time. There could be no grand meaning in a life so short, nor in a longer one. How could he have thought to overcome such a problem with hedonism? His recklessness robbed his future selves of everything, while giving nothing of value to the present. He then realized a much greater truth. Obvious though it was, his future selves were of exactly the same importance to him as all future selves. So if he were to stop robbing his future selves, he must logically in equal measure stop robbing all future selves. He found a job doing farm work in the country. Each day he worked, and each night he sat alone with his thoughts. Many years passed. Each day was the same pleasant cycle. He spoke little to the townsfolk, but when he did, he was always cheerful, patient, and kind. Mostly they also wanted little to do with him, and regarded him as an old fool, although a few treated him almost like a holy man. What little money he had, he gave away, for he knew he had no claim on it. No one can possibly deserve the money they have, for it isn't them who earn it, but a past self. Anyone else has an equal right to it, so he gave whatever he could to those who were the poorest. He knew what it was like to have a life poisoned by the foolishness of your past. Eventually, he grew old and sick, and was told he would die. When given the news, he simply smiled and thanked the doctor.
Are you sure you understand what I'm saying?
He had died 1,000 deaths. feared not one more. He felt only a pang of sadness that his memories would not be passed on. Mostly, however, he reflected happily on the thoughts of himself and his past lives. He thought his moment of life was perhaps the greatest of them all. Although he had to endure the pain of illness as the last man, he had the memory of all his previous selves, whereas each of them would never know the thoughts of those who came after themselves. And so, he passed peacefully into the void for the last time.